The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was released on the Nintendo Switch in March of 2017. 1 year later, we've now experienced this launch title in its entirety, with all the game's planned DLC having been released over the last year. In that time, if anything can be said about Breath of the Wild, it's that it's proven itself to be an enormously divisive game. With early 10 out of 10 scores at launch and Game of the Year awards galore, there's no denying that many have enjoyed this new entry in the Legend of Zelda series. Conversely, Breath of the Wild has also earned the ire of many gamers, who believe it undeserving of such high acclaim. Let's discuss. This review will contain spoilers. So I'll start off with a list of some things that really worked for me. This game threw a crap ton of spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. There was lots of new, lots of change, lots of different. Not everything they tried worked, but a few things did. Number 1. The ability to instantly fast travel from anywhere. Many have claimed that this is the most freedom ever in a Zelda game. I have mixed feelings regarding that statement, but I can say that when it comes to fast traveling, this new system they implemented makes for fluid, unstilted gameplay. You could be in mid-air, falling off a cliff, in a heated battle, it doesn't matter. You can warp out of there. Being able to fast travel from anywhere at any time is a wonderful improvement over past fast travel systems, and I hope to see it again in future installments. Number 2. Go anywhere, climb anything. Encouraging players to traverse and interact with their environment in an entirely new way has been enormously satisfying. It opens up so many possibilities for navigating Hyrule's terrain, making each player's experience unique and accommodating of that person's preference, skill, and curiosities. Nintendo spent a ton of time and resources on the physics system in this game. Everything from how objects interact with each other to soaring across this world feels weighted, textured, and thoughtful. It may be the thing I love the most about this game. Number 3. Instantly calling your horse or motorcycle. Again, people like to travel fast. This is nice. However, I wish these conveniences were presented much earlier in the game. Number 4. Musical selections. One of the things I love most about the Zelda franchise is the music. The addictive melodies, epic scores, and the wonderful layers of personality music adds to each distinctive region. I'm one of those people that thought this game would have benefited from a little more music. I absolutely love the themes for Hateno Village and Hyrule Castle. Even Kakariko has a nice charm to it. The game works with as little music as it has, but it feels like a huge missed opportunity to introduce new themes for the franchise, and give more of the visually unique areas across this world an even deeper identity through sound and melody. Number 5. Sneaking and stealth kills. Link's never really been able to sneak, aside from avoiding NPCs' line of sight, so it's nice that they finally introduced the mechanic. That being said, I can't stand the stealth portions of Zelda games. If you like them, good for you. I'm just not a fan of having to tiptoe around guards or avoid spotlights or whatever obligatory don't get seen by someone or else you'll have to start all over portion of the game we for some reason have to include in every single Zelda title. Just like there's always that segment where it's like, oh, this is the point of the game where we lose all our items. God, let's just get this part over with. I'd really like to see Nintendo leave these things behind. Stealthy avoidance sections and taking away all the things you've earned sections. They're overdone and not very fun. More like mandatory low points to just get through. Anywho, number 6. Map navigation and functionality. This is the best map in any Zelda game to date. Not only is the terrain represented well, but the interactive aspects are easily underappreciated. Zooming in and out is gracious enough to give you fine detail, and all the ways you can mark the landscape with customized pins is extremely accommodating. Number 7. Infinite bombs. This was a nice addition, as was the different shape of bombs, round or cube, depending on whether or not you wanted them to roll. You have to look at the thought process on this one though, to understand why Nintendo decided to give us an unlimited amount of this valuable item. There are no more dungeon items in Breath of the Wild. Heck, most people would argue there aren't even dungeons. So we wouldn't have acquired bombs as part of a dungeon quest like in previous Zelda titles. So then introducing bombs and constantly refilling your inventory would have had to come from things like bomb flowers spread throughout the land, shops that sell them, or enemies that drop them as loot. These all seem too sporadic and inefficient considering how much bombs are actually used during the course of this game, which is a lot, so Nintendo was almost obligated to just give us this one, which they did, but of course they incorporated several limitations. The main trade-off is that they made bombs substantially weaker when used as weapons. Yeah, they can blast enemies into the air, but you might use 15 or more bombs to kill some enemies when in previous Zelda games it would have only taken 1 or 2. It's pretty unrealistic when a single bomb can blast apart a pile of rocks, or these stone-hard gem deposits, but it wouldn't instantly incinerate the flesh of a moblin. So they made them incredibly underpowered against enemies, so you'd be discouraged from using them as your main freebie go-to for every single fight. Not that you didn't do that anyway. Also, they added a recharge time between bomb uses. You can have as many as you want, but we're going to make you wait between them. Then you have added environmental consequences for using bombs as opposed to other weapons. Like mining stones, for example. You can use your drill shaft on this stone and all the loot will fall nice and neat where you stand. You might break the drill shaft, but would you rather use a chaotic, unpredictable bomb and chance your loot blasting over the side of the cliff you're on? So Nintendo's urging you not to use bombs in this instance, even though you can. This sort of manipulation, limitation, and compensation is seen throughout the game, and not just for bombs. Don't worry, we'll get into all that. Number 8, jumping right in. The opening cutscene aside, I appreciated how fast this game throws you right into its world. Breath of the Wild basically just says go. You get your first weapons within minutes, if not seconds, and a mysterious old man suggests your first objectives just down the road from where you started. I don't mind exposition and tutorials in my games. Sometimes it's important, so that you have a firm grasp on a game's core mechanics and an understanding of the world itself. In Breath of the Wild, it's not necessary, and it's nice to instantly get straight into the action. Number 9, references. I liked all the nods to previous Zelda games. It made Breath of the Wild feel like a trip down memory lane, if only for a few seconds here and there. Naturally, one would expect Hyrule to change and evolve over the Zelda timeline. We've never really seen extensive evidence of that in previous titles. The references are fairly scattered and you might not even notice them, even when you're looking right at them. But for those who recognize their intention, it's a nice moment when you find one. Number 10, design evolution. I'm not talking about the art style here. I'm saying I like how they keep evolving the races with every Zelda iteration. What does everything from their body type to posture, features, color palette, and environment say about their attitude and culture? I think they absolutely nailed the design for these guys. Number 11. No more wallets. With the introduction of selling items at shops, Link needed to be able to carry large amounts of currency. Now, upgrading your wallet size has been a staple in Zelda games for a pretty long time. Leaving it out in Breath of the Wild really worked. Besides, honestly, wallets and money limits in games are outdated and all but obsolete. Alright, now some quick ones. Number 12, I like that you can dye your clothes. Number 13, I like the new little blue elusive bunny creature that drops rupees and vanishes. Number 14, I like that there are like half a dozen ways to get into Hyrule Castle instead of just one. And 15, I like the motorcycle, but more on that later. Alright, and here we go, now to the fun stuff. Let's talk about just how frustrating, broken, and poorly thought out this game actually is. Number 1, let's talk about outfits. The decision to include a vast array of unique clothing and armor in Breath of the Wild was a wonderful break from tradition. Customizing the look of your character in an open-world RPG adds an enormous sense of personalization for a player. It's a way to feel like you're playing as a more tailored representation of your own persona. You can create any wacky, weird combination you want, which is absolutely fantastic, and so satisfying. Until the game forces you to discard your preferred look for a different armor set better suited to your task. This is one of the biggest reasons I found this game so infuriating, and the best way I can illustrate how much this problematic and insufferable mechanic affected every minute of my time with the game is by referencing the most loathsome dungeon in Zelda history, the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time. One of the main reasons people find this particular dungeon so frustrating is that, in order to proceed through it, you're constantly having to pause the game, navigate a menu, equip your iron boots, unpause, move a few steps forward, pause, unequip the boots, unpause, proceed, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. In later ports of the game, Nintendo made the iron boots mappable to one of the item buttons, so at least you don't have to enter the menu every time. Even so, with outfits in Breath of the Wild, Nintendo took this thing that everyone hated about the Water Temple and doubled down on it. They tripled down on it. Heck, they made it a core aspect of everything you do throughout the entire game. To all those people who haven't played Breath of the Wild yet, If you hated being forced to constantly switch your boots on and off in Ocarina's water temple, I've got some bad news for you. It's the whole freaking game. Let's just say you're running around in whatever you like to run around in. Yay, I look the way I want to look. Alright, I want to swim across this pond and climb up that cliff. But because swimming sucks so bad in this game, I want to at least move as fast as I can while doing it. I mean, I earned those pieces of armor and spent hours and hours upgrading them all so that I can swim faster. I have to put on the Zora breastplate, the Zora helm, and the Zora greaves because I only get the fast swim set bonus when I wear all three at the same time. Alright, and now I'm at the cliff. Aw, man, I'll climb it super slowly wearing this armor. I need to switch to my climbing outfit, don't I? I mean, I earned those pieces and spent hours and hours upgrading them so that I could climb faster. Don't want them to go to waste. And there, okay. There we go. And woohoo, I made it to the top. Yay, now I can change back into what I want to wear, since I don't have to swim or climb anymore. Okay, and there. Alright, here we go. Wait, I think I can actually upgrade some of my armor. I'll go visit a great fairy. Alright, open the map, and we're warping, Alright. Okay. What? Now I'm freezing in the desert and losing life. Better switch to something that'll let me withstand these unsavory temperatures. Switch that. And there we go. And now I can finally move around without losing life here. And yeah, I know I could have just eaten something with a warming effect, but why waste something in my inventory when I have a piece of clothing that does the exact same thing for free? Anyway, oh wait, I just remembered. Before I can upgrade that thing I was gonna upgrade, I need like 3 more butterflies. Those are up with the Goron people. So I'll just snag them and head back here. And we're warping, There it go. There it is. Alright. And crap. Now I'm burning to death because my clothes suck. Hold on. Okay. Switching to the big, clunky, fireproof armor. Okay, here we go. Come at me, butterflies. Ah, crap. Another cliff. Hold on. Okay. Oh, okay. I'm dying again. This sucks so much. And now we switch back because we don't want to die. And now I can look for stupid butterflies wearing this armor that I hate. This is The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Or better yet, The Legend of Zelda constantly switching outfits. Not only does this rob the player of the sheer delight they experience in dressing how they want to dress, individualizing their character, but it disrupts the pacing of the game constantly. Basically, Nintendo's saying, dress however you want to dress, be creative, expressive, look however you want to look, until you have to do something. It gets really bad. Like, the temperature can change drastically with just the slightest change in elevation. You go from warm summer temperatures on the ground to Link freezing his ass off in the Arctic tundra. And it's even worse, even more unbelievably ridiculous, when just moving a few steps can make you suddenly pass into extreme temperatures. Like on one side of this line it's 80 degrees. On the other side it's -20, forcing you to stop your game once again. This is mind-blowingly idiotic, and just downright sloppy. Armor and defense ratings also play a huge part in how poorly thought out this system is. Link can only upgrade certain pieces of armor, which means that many of the clothing and armor sets you find throughout the game, discover in the DLC, or acquire with an amiibo come standard, with a low armor ranking that you cannot upgrade. They're cosmetic, they're just there for looks. Meaning that if you want to run around with the Lionel mask, Ganon's armor, and the Royal Guard boots, if that's what you want your Link to look like, you will be at an enormous disadvantage. He will take huge hits in battle. He will have no buffs. He won't swim faster, climb faster, run faster, withstand heat or cold, have better defense against certain enemies, or whatever else other armor offers you. It doesn't matter that you've played for 300 hours. It doesn't matter what you've earned, what trials you've overcome. You chose a cosmetic piece of armor that Nintendo said isn't one of the pieces you can improve. Listen, people making the next Zelda game. Either make all of your armor upgradable, or all of them purely cosmetic. There are proven systems that work for both. And if you want to spotlight the freedom to wear whatever you want, and make personalizing Link a big draw of the game, don't punish your player for picking certain pieces over others.
Oh, well, I want to run around in my new armor I just found. But I'm about to face a Lionel, so I guess I should equip my Tunic of the Wild stuff, because that has the highest armor ranking. Oh, but I want to fight him in my goofy clothes. My character should be like so super powerful at this point. But I guess wearing this shirt that came with the $20 DLC I just spent money on will make me get one-shotted and die. Oh, come on, game, don't be like that.
Let's talk solutions, people. One solution? Armor's just a skin. If all of your armor sets are essentially skins, have the armor, defense, whatever rating apply to Link himself. For example, in Ocarina, Link progressively becomes stronger and more resilient over time, to the point where toward the end of the game, your life is essentially doubled by one of the great fairies, because you passed the tests, solved the puzzles, and earned a tool which helps you acquire that upgrade. Or tie that progression to an item. Give Link a power bracelet or ring or something, that the more you progress and upgrade through trials, quests, and the like, it improves his resistance to damage. People at the beginning of the game would still get one-shotted a lot. People toward the end would have a higher threshold, regardless of their fashion preference. They could wear whatever they want because their defense rating is tied to the item. Or you look at something like Skyrim, where you're constantly upgrading your health throughout your playthrough when you level up. I'm not saying Zelda needs experience points and leveling up. I'm saying build Link's increasing resilience into the game's progression beyond just adding pieces of heart. Now don't get me wrong, I'm actually a huge fan of armor systems in games, and ratings on armor itself, not merely the character, especially when it's done well. Not like this. The lopsided armor defense ratings, limited upgrading, and set bonuses exclusive only to certain armor sets are actually constantly actively deterring you from having any individuality in this game. And it's cumbersome. I've switched between armor sets hundreds of times during my playthrough, and I still fumble around looking for them because of how poorly these menus are organized. Seriously, arranging things like this would have made so much more sense. The 5 squares across hodgepodge arrangement they went with has no sense of organization and no feeling of thoughtful separation. Instead of, here are the armor sets you've collected, clearly laid out in a consistent manner, it's just, here's everything you got, just kinda all together like. Anyway, set bonuses and buffs. I have a solution for that too, and it would have made this game feel so much more Zelda-y. For all those people who felt like Breath of the Wild was missing some of that Zelda DNA special sauce. Ready for this? It ain't rocket science, folks. It's items. The Legend of Zelda series is chock full of fun, interesting, creative, unique items that have granted Link special abilities. These aren't weapons I'm talking about, or dungeon item types. You earn these ability-improving objects throughout the course of your journey. They're not items that you select, but rather are collected by your character and utilized automatically when interacting with the world. Let's look at some examples. The Silver Scale in Ocarina of Time. This lets Link dive deeper underwater. Later in the game, you get the Golden Scale, an upgrade that lets you dive even further down. You've got the Silver and Gold Gauntlets, which lean more toward dungeon itemy, but they progressively enhance your ability to lift heavier and heavier things. The Hero's Charm in Wind Waker lets Link see an enemy's health bar. The Fire Shield earrings and Skyward Sword provide protection in a volcanic environment. These earrings are essentially the entire Flamebreaker armor set in Breath of the Wild. The Digging Mitts and Magma Mitts let Link dig in the dirt. The Blue Ring, the Red Ring, these reduce damage inflicted by your enemies. And so on. Instead of having the Swim Faster bonus only if you're wearing all 3 pieces of the Zora armor, this game would have been way more fun if you'd have been given something like the Zora Amulet or something. This thing could have also had the Zora Breastplate's functionality. If you don't know what the Zora Breastplate is, it's this piece of Zora armor you have to stop and equip every single time you want to swim up a waterfall. It's annoying. Having something like the Zora Amulet would mean that the abilities you've earned would stay with you, regardless of what you're wearing. And if you've got your heart set on upgrading these types of things, Nintendo, well, that's what you can upgrade. Every time you upgrade the amulet, you swim faster. It makes it a whole lot simpler and a whole lot more enjoyable than upgrading 3 different pieces of your Zora armor set 4 times each. But what about all the other things that different armor sets let you do? Well, it ain't that hard, people. For climbing, it could be something like the Climber's Belt. Upgrading that makes you climb faster each time. For surviving the cold, how about the Snow Quill Sash? It's magic. It keeps Link warm. Regarding the rubber suit, you can have grounded soles for your boots. For surviving volcanic environments like the Flamebreaker armor, you have the Flamebreaker Falls. For stealth, you've got your stealth bracers. But what if you're like, I want to choose when I'm being super stealthy and when I'm not? Alright, so make it that players have the option of enabling and disabling that item. It's not that hard, and you get the point. What's great is that these ability items are small and unobtrusive enough to translate across any and all outfit preferences. You can still dress however you want while keeping the abilities you've earned and upgraded. Not only would this have made the game so much more fun to play without detracting from its challenges, but it would have helped the pacing immensely. All those times I had to bring the game to a screeching halt just to keep changing clothes never would have happened. This simple mechanic cuts out all the needless switching and switching back over and over again throughout the entire game. And it gives the developers another opportunity to show off their creativity in coming up with these things. What are they? What are they called? What do they look like? Does their design evolve with every upgrade? These are opportunities to introduce cool new things into Zelda canon. And of course, bringing everything full circle, it would have genuinely let each and every player maintain their own unique identity while playing. The advantages of this are priceless, because you have to realize, the longer a player thinks, doesn't my character look so cool, the more they become enamored with what they're playing. Number 2, weapon durability. Alright, let's get this one out of the way because it's been talked to death about over the last year. First of all, it's annoying. It's just so annoying. It's so frustrating having to constantly fight and break and fight and break and fight and break and spend countless hours refilling your stock of weapons only for them to break and break and break and break over and over and over again. This is not fun for me. This doesn't make the fights more challenging, it challenges my patience. And it challenges pacing. It completely disrupts the flow of the fight and consequently the game itself. Now the developers have argued that weapon breaking encourages players to use different weapons. Weapons you might not have otherwise wielded, were you content with keeping to your favorite unbreakable sword. In other words, it forces you to branch out. I see the intention here. And maybe that was the reason that they put weapons with the fragility of actual cosplay swords in this game. But after enduring Breath of the Wild's annoyances for an ungodly amount of hours, I can say that the effects of weapon durability are far from what the developers hoped. It didn't make me try new weapons. It didn't make me want to try new weapons. In fact, it did exactly the opposite. I used the Master Sword because it broke less often than anything else. When it needed to recharge, I only used Royal Broadswords as backups, because they lasted longer than other one-handed weapons and dealt reasonable damage. I had absolutely no desire to burn through 11 random weapons I picked up along the way. And the other effect weapon breaking had was that I never ended up using the rare high-level special weapons I earned throughout my playthrough. Oh, what a cool new sword! Awesome! I'm never gonna use it! The Lionel sword is my favorite weapon in the game because it looks cool. After my first one broke after a few hits, I never used another one. I got a couple good ones and kept them in my inventory because I never wanted them to break. So I never used them. So I never got to enjoy them. Because I'd rather break 3 replaceable weapons than lose something special. In this way, the game didn't encourage me to try new things, as the developers stated was a motivating factor of weapon durability. It made me stick to one specific weapon, simply because it was the best way I found to limit the frustration weapon breaking caused me. This was the case for a slew of other items I collected along the way. I have the Hylian shield. Guess what? Never used it either. I don't even want to take the chance of equipping the damn thing because I don't want anything to happen to it. Nintendo has effectively convinced players not to use what could be the most rewarding and satisfying assets in the game. I'm disheartened that people who bought Breath of the Wild aren't allowed to experiment freely with the game's weapons and decide for themselves which felt the most appropriate for their character, and then keep that on them at all times. Or how about making a fight extra challenging for yourself? Even more challenging than the developers ever could. Like, hey dude, I bet you can't take down that silver Lionel with just a Boko club. Challenge accepted, let's do it. That would never happen in the game we got. That stupid club would break after 5 hits. If weapons in this game didn't break, I would have loved to run around experimenting with different types. Did I want to run around all day fighting things with the meteor rod? Bet your ass I did. I cannot tell you how many times I had to stop what I was doing just because I ran out of bows, swords, or broke my last stone smasher, and head back to Hyrule Castle. After abandoning my current objective, I'd spend 10 to 15 minutes restocking my inventory, then leave and try to pick up wherever I left off. I've gone back to that castle at least 50 times, and that's a safe estimate. That's 50 times doing the same thing I've already done over and over again. Now there's another incredible advantage to weapons not breaking, and it's best illustrated when you can see just how many different items there are in this game. Zelda games are a completionist's dream. We like finding all the secret things, we like filling every inventory slot. If we were able to fill out our inventory with every weapon in the game, first of all, it opens up so many more options for combat, if that's getting stale for you. But it also adds an aspect of completion, hunting down all these interesting assets. And that's another collecting objective that is way better padding than having to go get your 15th Dragon Claw or your 22nd Star Fragment. Seeing something like this, where I'm obviously missing something in my inventory, makes me want to keep playing the game. Like, I'm not going to bed until I find those last 3 weapons, no matter how long it takes. Furthermore, instead of avoiding enemy camps because you don't want your sword to break, you'd actually be encouraged to seek out enemies, because maybe they'll drop something you haven't gotten yet. Maybe some of these weapons are rewards for solving puzzles, heck, secret rooms and dungeons or shrines. Maybe they're dropped by special enemies, mini-bosses, or even actual bosses. Boss weapons sound pretty amazeballs. This is yet another opportunity for creativity. If it's not clear enough already, this type of gameplay encourages players to try new weapons way more than weapons breaking every fight does. Like, I've been using the Master Sword too long, I have all this other cool stuff. I'll try using this one for a while. And of course, this would carry over to the other items in your inventory. Collect all the game's shields, all the bows, customize your Link with the weapon that fits your energy and playstyle. And taking it further, for your quick weapon select menus, you could simply select like 10 favorites for your quick go-tos during combat. Even with weapon durability in the game, I wish Nintendo had laid out our inventory menus with a greater sense of organization. This is just one way they could have done it, rather than the melting pot of sloppiness we got. Something clearly laid out, separating your armor and your weapon sets instead of just mashing them all together in one big messy toy box of laziness. Number 3. Rain. Another obvious one. We're getting these out of the way. Here we go. Rain and weather systems have been around for quite a while, but never have they been so infuriating and literally game-stopping as they are in Breath of the Wild. Joining countless others who've ranted about having to literally put down the controller and wait for rain to pass while playing this game, I'm searching for a reason why Nintendo could have possibly thought this would be enjoyable. I came across an interview where they said, "Initially, we did consider giving players control of the weather, but realized not being able to control it is much more fun. It was more interesting to have Link against nature, not controlling it. That ended up being more natural and fun. These guys legitimately thought that people getting mad or frustrated or bored was fun for them. Now, you do have a few solutions for getting past the rain issue. You can absolutely abandon what you're doing and fast travel to another area where it's not raining, then do something else for a while. This is a horrible solution, by the way. Maybe you've invested half an hour or so into an objective, and you want to see it through to completion. This solution doesn't always work either. Odds are it'll also be raining wherever you warp to, because apparently it likes to rain over most of Hyrule at the same time. You can also advance time forward, so the rain passes faster. But in order to do that, you either need to find a bed to sleep in, find a campfire that isn't dispelled by the rain, good luck, or make your own fire. But you can only make your own fire if you have coverage above you, like a roof. And you have to have firewood and fire starting materials. Also, sometimes when you make a fire and wait until the next day, you'll wake up and guess what? It's raining again. All of these ways of dealing with rain completely stop the flow of your momentum. They stop the game dead in its tracks. Rain and what it makes you do inhibit the game's pace. All the time. And when I say all the time, I mean I just don't understand why it rains so freaking much in this game. It's like the developers have a 24-hour cycle where they think thunderstorms need to be peppered in for at least half the day. Rain should be rare.
Now, what'd you mean when you said you can't do anything when it rains?
Well, whenever you move across the landscape, you're going to be climbing things, right? Like, a lot. Rain makes climbing virtually impossible. You climb up 5 feet, you slide back down 4. You use up all your stamina and end up back at the bottom of whatever wall or cliff you need to climb, until the rain goes away and everything dries up. This is not fun, Nintendo. Now, at a certain point in the game, you'll acquire an ability called Regali's Gale, which is essentially a super jump that'll be your saving grace when it comes to reaching higher areas quickly. But depending on how you progress through the game, you might not get it until much later in your playthrough, and you can only use it 3 times before it has to recharge for a few minutes. And there's no guarantee it'll get you all the way up the cliff you're climbing. So even with this ability, you still might be stuck until the rain stops. The other way it makes you just stare at the screen for 15 minutes is with the introduction of lightning. Unless you've progressed far enough into the game and completed the side quest for the Thunder Helm, a helmet that allows you not to get fried when struck by lightning, you'll get fried when struck by lightning. And I'm talking about a potential one-hit and die situation here. You can try parking it under the cover of trees, but lightning can still find you there. The best bet is to just leave or find a roof. Just wait it out, undercover, just put down your controller, and not play the game you're trying to play. Weather adds a beautiful texture to video games. It creates some of the most amazing imagery on screen. Take a look at these other games that have weather systems. They don't inhibit the player. They add to the experience. They make the world feel real. They help immerse the player into the environment, into the scene. So for the next time around, I really hope Nintendo decides to keep rain in the game, because it adds a wonderful texture and tone. But you need to have far less of it, and don't make it completely debilitate your player. Because rain and Breath of the Wild just makes you hate the game sometimes. No one likes to stop playing. No one likes waiting. Which leads me to my next point. Number 4. Waiting. You will be spending an inordinate amount of time in this game just waiting. Literally, standing still for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, and even longer in some cases. You'll wait for rain to stop, for lightning to pass, for dragons to slowly make their way down from the sky, for star fragments to maybe fall at some point during the night. You'll be waiting for your Master Sword to recharge. You'll be waiting for ice to melt, for hot springs to slowly refill your hearts. You'll be waiting for Regali's Gale to recharge. You'll be waiting for the time of day to change, if you need to do something that only happens at a certain time of day, like finding Kilton's store, or spotting luminous stones. And so many more, you get the point. This is not fun, engaging gameplay. It's play the game by not playing the game. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you The Legend of Zelda, Waiting in the Wild. Number 5. Stamina. This is a big one, because it affects absolutely everything you do. Stamina was introduced in Skyward Sword, and it was a total nightmare. You couldn't run, move up certain inclines, or jump to an easy-to-reach ledge without using stamina. The stamina mechanic was so bad in Skyward Sword that they literally had to put stamina fruit everywhere in the world, just so you could constantly refill your stamina meter and continue moving at a reasonable speed. Stamina in Skyward Sword was terrible in execution, and just a terrible idea in general. And not only did they put it in Breath of the Wild, they made it a major component of basic movement. I have so much disdain for this thing, let's just start with the most obvious. Running. You can run in Breath of the Wild. At the beginning of the game, in roughly 2-second bursts. Then you wait for your stamina to refill. And repeat. As you gradually build up your stamina over the course of the game, your movement across the world comes in slightly longer stilted start-stop bursts. It's not fluid, it's not fun, and if you happen to run for 1 millisecond too long, you're punished. Your movement speed is drastically slowed until your stamina meter replenishes at a slower rate than normal. It's like Link is forced to take a time out. If you manage to fully upgrade your stamina, you can run for about 8 seconds at a time. Seriously, games that just let their character run are more fun to move around in. Running becomes a natural tool at your disposal, to traverse terrain quickly. Limiting Link's movement with stamina is a fun stopper, and an immersion killer, if only for showcasing the game's visuals. In open-world games, part of the enjoyment comes from marveling at your surroundings. Breath of the Wild cripples this delight, this interaction, by placing a giant green bullseye in the center of your screen. Your eyes are conditioned to look at target-like shapes. Instead of being able to fully appreciate the artistry of the landscape around you, you're locked in to this attention-grabbing meter, constantly watching it run down then refill. Run down then refill. This detracts from the experience. Hopefully this gets fixed in the next installment when Nintendo drops the idea of stamina completely, because it's crap. Anyway, early on I started to get a weird vibe while playing, like it felt like Nintendo was just trying to think of more and more ways to limit you in this game. It feels like you're struggling just to move forward. Like Nintendo has you on a short leash they keep tugging on every 5 seconds. Like you're driving, but they're constantly pumping the brakes. And stamina also greatly affects other aspects of moving across the world, like climbing. Now, you hear people say things like, "You have to be smart about climbing. Prepare, strategize. You have to make sure you have enough stamina to get to the top of whatever it is you're climbing. If you don't have enough stamina, you need to make sure you're stocked with stamina potions to get you the rest of the way to the top." These are nothing more than needless obstacles and inconveniences that do nothing but slow you down. You get there anyway. It's not as intricately strategic and methodical as people would have you think. And there's a reason you don't see stamina around in most games anymore. It's outdated. People realized it sucked and stopped using it. Just take a look at climbing in Assassin's Creed Origins and Horizon Zero Dawn. Not only is it fluid, unstilted, wonderfully paced movement, but it's fun. This interaction with the environment feels amazing. And there's still danger. You can fall to your death if you're not careful. Both of these games allow the player the freedom of climbing without the nuisance of your character constantly running out of climbing gas. And they are better, more enjoyable games for it. Anyway, stamina in Breath of the Wild also exists, so Link has something else to upgrade with spirit orbs he gets from completing shrines. But before we can talk about shrines, we have to look at something else first. Number 6. The Sheikah slate. Every Zelda game introduces a new gimmick, or flavor, or core gameplay mechanic. Now Breath of the Wild introduces futuristic technology in the form of a friggin' cell phone, or tablet, whatever you want to call it. That's what we got with this one. The idea here is that Link uses the tablet's different apps to interact with his environment. Every time you use one of the interaction apps, it throws this completely un-Zelda computerized grid overlay over the whole world. I hated this from the first time I saw it. It just didn't feel appropriate for a sword and shield fantasy adventure. Neither did the weird sounds that accompany it. It's like Link enters the grid from Tron every time he needs to do something. Instead of the dumb Sheikah slate, this is where the game could have done something more appropriate to the world. Still new, still different, yet it would have had that traditional nostalgic Zelda feel. I'm talking about items again, people. There's no reason the Unlimited Bombs app couldn't have been something like the Bomb Ring, or the Bomb Bracelet. Magnesis could have been the Magnesis Rod. Stasis could have been the Stasis Stone. Cryonis could have been the ice shard or something, and heck, even the camera could have been the Picto Box. They've used that in previous titles, so you don't have to call it a camera. Something, anything. Apps on a cell phone just screams a lack of originality. It's dull and it's boring. Immersion through believable, tangible objects you hold and use and appreciate in your inventory is so much deeper than switch to this digital-looking ability icon. Tangible items add a fantasy-esque world-building texture to the game. So Link has this thing that is essentially a modern-day real-world device. And that just really takes me right out of the game. Like if they'd given Legolas an Oculus Rift and Gandalf an e-cig. Now what a lot of people don't realize is that the concept of something like the Sheikah slate is emblematic of a very large problem with this game that affects every single facet of Breath of the Wild because it's woven into its DNA. Breath of the Wild feels like two completely different teams designing two completely different games. One team was dedicated to creating the massive overworld, every rock, river, and blade of grass, gorges, mountains, caves, ice, and lava pits you'll be navigating for most of your experience. And the other team was dedicated to shrines. This is a game that lacks a consistent vision. So that's the Sheikah slate. That's what it does. That's why it's a terrible idea and should never have been in the game, or any future Zelda game for that matter. But it also serves another very important role. It unlocks shrines, like it's Link's access keycard or something. Number 7, shrines. Shrines, for those that haven't played the game, are underground rooms with a puzzle inside that you have to solve by using the apps on your Sheikah slate. They're sterile, futuristic, alien technology-looking spaces that, once again, look like they have absolutely no place in this fantasy world. So much, in fact, that they feel more like an entirely different game. Like a cheap spin-off, like Link's Shrine Trials, 120 levels of puzzle solving. Every single shrine looks the same. They all just repeat the same floors, walls, and whatever else. Of the 120 shrines in Breath of the Wild, I found the first 10 or so easy, yet enjoyable enough. Then a realization hit me. All these shrines just have slight variants of each other's tasks in them. Nintendo obviously ran out of puzzle ideas centered around using your Sheikah slate apps pretty quickly, because then they just started copying and pasting a fight with a single enemy over and over for what seems like at least 20 of the shrines. Well, that's it. That's all you have to do inside some of them. Fight this guy or a harder version of him. What sucks is that this is a game built around proving you can complete a challenge, then mindlessly repeating that same challenge more times than you can count. Now for 42 of the shrines, you have to complete some sort of task to make them appear. And before you start thinking that Nintendo got creative with those shrine quests, they're mostly just fetch quests. If you don't know what fetch quests are, it's where someone says, "Bring me this thing," and then you bring it to them. And then you're done. Shrines weren't fun in Breath of the Wild. They weren't fun because they were repetitive visually and in the puzzles or lack thereof that they presented. So why have them in the game at all? Well, one of the reasons people love Zelda games so much is because they love solving all the fun, interesting puzzles the games present. Breath of the Wild is so sparse on content, they kinda backed themselves into a corner, in that they didn't give themselves a storyline that would accommodate extensive puzzle solving, like hopping from dungeon to dungeon, solving rooms, taking on a few side quests that presented interesting challenges. Nope, shrines are Breath of the Wild's puzzle element. Another reason they're there, we've introduced the Sheikah slate and its apps, right? Well, we don't really use them too much in the outside world. I mean, every once in a while. Rarely. We don't want it to seem like all these apps are just kinda useless extra things we put in the game, right? So let's make the shrines solely dedicated to using those 4 mechanics. It'll give the Sheikah slate more purpose. So, there's that. Shrines also act as fast travel locations. 120 warp points scattered across the land so Link can fast travel relatively close to wherever he needs to go. I'd argue that this is yet another useless functionality in the game. Again, Nintendo trying to add purpose to something that should never have been there at all. Why not just let people warp to locations they've already discovered? It's the same damn thing, and with this awesome map, it actually makes plenty of sense. Just let Link warp to Terrytown. Why does it have to be the shrine nearest Terrytown? Massive open worlds simply work better with that type of freedom. Lastly, shrines exist to provide the player with spirit orbs that they can trade in for heart pieces or stamina upgrades. which also means that if you wanted to increase your health or stamina, you were encouraged to explore the world and hunt these shrines down, so you can get their dumb spirit orbs. What are spirit orbs, you ask? Honestly, I don't know. I forgot if the game even told us, but I honestly don't care. What I do know is that I hate trading in things for other things. What do I mean? Well, in Skyward Sword, whenever you completed side quests, you were rewarded with gratitude crystals, usually 5 of them, which you then traded in for bigger and bigger wallets throughout the course of the game. Nintendo, please just give us the thing, and not the things we have to trade in for the thing. But Nintendo went the Spirit Orb route with Breath of the Wild because they wanted you to trade in 4 at a time for either a new heart container or a stamina upgrade, which is also dumb. A famous and generally well-accepted mechanic in the Legend of Zelda series is heart pieces. Sometimes 4 heart pieces equals a whole heart, sometimes 5, depending on the game. So just have some shrines give heart pieces and some give stamina vessel parts. Easy. Done. No spirit orbs necessary. The best solution, of course, and I've already mentioned this, is to do away with stamina altogether. It's just awful. And, in an ideal world, they just get rid of shrines, too.
What do you say? What do you mean get rid of shrines? What about all the puzzles in them? And all the heart pieces you get from them?
Well, you see, Zelda has these things called side quests. In Breath of the Wild, there are 90 side quests. Or should I say, 90 fetch quests. Okay, it's not every single one of them, but it's pretty darn close. It's either, bring me this, kill this guy, or find this thing. And usually it's, bring me an absurdly large number of this item. You can actually see how the brains at Nintendo work here. Instead of thinking up creative tangent adventures for Link to go on, what they do is try and make a lazy, uninteresting task interesting by adding dialogue beforehand. Like, in Hateno Village, some guy says, go bring me crickets. Like Nintendo thought, how many crickets should this guy ask for? 1? 10? That'll keep the players busy. It's a stupid, mundane task hunting all these things down. But they try to make that stupid, mundane task meaningful by saying that he needs the crickets because he wants to give them to his lady friend or something. That's why the side quests in Breath of the Wild suck so much. That's why they're uninspired, repetitive, forgettable, lazy, and also lazy. It's because Nintendo didn't spend time and energy making them interesting. They just came up with new reasons each NPC wanted you to do their specific fetching. And just about all of them reward you with the same thing, a little bit of money, which at a certain point in the game you just really don't need anymore. And the solution here is obvious. The shrine quests, shrine puzzles, and side quests could have all been combined, whittled down, leaner, and rewarded the player with heart pieces in addition to their other rewards. Like a unique weapon to permanently add to your inventory, I'd only hope. Or an item that provides a buff against whatever enemy, I don't know. Like there's this shrine where you just have to get up to a high place. That totally could have been a side quest, resulting in a heart piece. Some lady's like,
oh, Link, help, my chicken, it's up there. Please help me get it down.
And then instead of being inside an alien spacecraft, it's set up the same way, but in a forest or ruins or something. So it actually looks like it belongs in the freaking world. And you're like, huh, that's too high to reach with my Regali's Gale. But I think I can use my magnesis rod on that thing right over there, instead of your smartphone app. And problem solved. And this approach also has the same effect of encouraging the player to explore the world, because these quests would have been spread throughout the land. Anyway, the other huge issue I have with shrines didn't present itself at first. When I learned there were 4 divine beasts I'd have to go to, I thought, cool, so alright, I guess this game only has 4 dungeons. I want as much health as possible before I go do my first one, so I'll go complete a lot of those shrines first, build up my heart containers. I did about 30 or 40 or so before I felt like banging my head against a wall, so I said, okay, I have quite a few extra hearts now. I'll go do my first dungeon. I went to the Zora, Varuta, or the elephant one, as I remember it now. And like many others have discovered, it wasn't a dungeon. It was just a big shrine. You moved parts of it around to activate 5 terminals, then fought a stupidly easy boss. And the whole experience in that region and its divine beast only took me around an hour and a half to complete. And that's when my second realization set in. And it was dreadful, and it was sour, because I realized that shrines were the meat of this game. Hunting them down, completing their asinine tasks. It crushed me that this would be my experience. that this is what Breath of the Wild had to offer. 120 shrines that were either half-assed, copy and pasted, or offered zero substance, and 4 uninteresting divine beasts that I could easily complete in less than a couple of hours each. That being said, I'd yet to realize the game would offer countless more hours of repetitive padding. Number 8. Countless hours of repetitive padding. This game garnered a good number of perfect 10 out of 10 scores at launch. Like I said, if you've played the game, you already know how you feel about this. Now, I could be totally off the mark here, but I think reviewers that gave Breath of the Wild a perfect score at launch binged the game for a few days, did the story, a lot of shrines, explored a little bit, then felt like they had a pretty good handle on what the game had to offer, and wanted to get their reviews out as soon as possible. They realized there was still so much more left to do in the game, and that greatly influenced their appraisal. I think a lot of them chose to ignore some very big problems with the game and look back on their experience through a rose-colored lens. Now, 1 year later, we've all had time to understand what Breath of the Wild offers in its totality, because we've been able to invest enough time in it to analyze it properly. The truth is, completing the main story takes very little time and effort. So, like so many other open-world RPGs, it was important for Nintendo to make sure there were many hours of content to discover outside of completing the 4 Divine Beasts and defeating Ganon. They did this in a few ways. First off, let's take a look at upgrading your armor. So we've already established that there are a large number of armor sets to upgrade. And when I say there are armor sets, that's because you're not just upgrading something like the Zora armor all at once. You upgrade each piece individually. This is padding at work, people. Getting the player to invest more hours in the game, breaking one thing into 3. There are 48 different pieces of equipment to upgrade in Breath of the Wild, from headgear to body to legs. And each of these has 4 upgrade levels, totaling 192 different upgrade processes you'll need to grind for materials for. This can take hours, days, even weeks of playtime, and Nintendo knows that. And the quantity of items required for each upgrade is a blatantly lazy means of padding out the game. What makes this system so frustrating is that it requires you to mindlessly revisit the same task over and over again. Again, it's like Nintendo saying, "Prove you can do it. Okay, now prove you can do it 40 more times. We've got hours to fill, and this is the easiest way we can think of." That'll keep them so busy. I wonder if that became the mantra when designing the game. That'll keep them busy. That'll give them something to do. And if you just so happen to run out of enemies who drop that loot you need, well, then you have to wait for the next Blood Moon, however long that'll take, before those enemies respawn. And it's not like Nintendo tells you everything you need for all 4 levels of upgrades at the beginning. They only tell you what you need for the upgrade you're on. So, instead of planning ahead saying, okay, to complete all my upgrades, I'm gonna need a total of 45 of this, 60 of that, and 15 of those. No. It comes to you as a, by the way, for the next upgrade, you'll need more of that thing you just went around collecting. And you're like, ah crap, Nintendo. And the requirements for upgrading just get so ridiculous the more you play. There are dragons in the game. 3 of them. If you hit them with an arrow, they drop loot, depending on where the arrow hits. Their mouth drops a fang, their horn drops a horn, their body drops a scale, and their hand drops a claw. The thing is, you can only get 1 of those items from each of them each day. And these aren't just any ordinary enemy. You have to set up camp in very specific places, wait, or sleep until a specific time of day. Then just sit and wait for them to slowly make their way down from the sky, until they're close enough to engage. Then, you have to hope and pray that you've timed your jumping and gliding right, so you can hit the exact part of them you need. Then that part rockets off their body to a distant location, which you have to make your way to. It might take a minute or so in some cases. Then you have to hope that that item hasn't fallen victim to gravity or wind and disappeared, making you do the whole thing all over again. And all that's just for 1 piece, the one you're allotted for that day. To be honest, the first time you do this successfully, you feel a little bit like a badass. It's a great feeling. But what you don't know is that Nintendo's gonna make you do it 50 more times, at least. And it gets really old, really fast. It becomes a slog. When it comes to upgrading something like the classic Link tunic, the Breath of the Wild set, things just start getting out of hand. For the first upgrade alone, you need 10 acorns for each item, so 30 of those. You need 2 scales from the dragon Farosh, 2 scales from the dragon Nadra, and 2 scales from the dragon Dinram. That's 6 more rinse and repeats of the dragon item collecting process. Now just stop and think about how much time that's going to take. The challenge is gone. The feeling of badassery is gone. Now it's just mundanely doing the same thing you've already done. For the second upgrade, you need 5 things of bee honey per item, and 2 claws from each of the 3 dragons. The third upgrade requires 5 energetic rhino beetles per item, and 2 fangs from each of the 3 dragons. Are you having fun yet? Lastly, the final upgrade for this set requires 2 horns from each of the 3 dragons, and 1 star fragment for each armor piece. What are star fragments, you ask? They're shooting stars that might touch down on land sometime during the night. How do you get them? Well, you wait or sleep until night. Then you stand still, watching the sky all night long. But there's no guarantee one will even fall. So you spend time getting somewhere and preparing for night, then you just sit and wait. Could be 10 minutes, could be 15. Just staring at your screen, doing nothing. Then, if one falls, boy, you better hightail it to that thing, because if it lands in water, it's gone. If it rolls into water because it lands on a hill, it's gone. So then you spend a minute or 2 working your way to it, hoping it's still there when you arrive. On very rare occasion, a Lionel, the hardest enemy in the game, might drop one. I think I've killed scores of Lionels, and I remember 1, maybe 2 have dropped star pieces over the course of my playthrough. There are also a few hidden in chests throughout the game, but seriously, don't waste your time hunting them down. If Nintendo's gonna be a punk about how many you need, just look online for the chest locations and spare yourself the 20 hours you'd spend looking for them until you just happened upon one. So for the 4th and final upgrade for this one set of armor, Nintendo makes you do this stargazing chore 3 times. Not to mention that you'll have done the dragon farming process 24 times, just for this one set of armor. Who knows what all your other sets will require? This upgrade system is downright terrible. Yes, it adds hours of gameplay, but they're hours where the player gains more and more contempt for the game and the people who made these decisions. But the only reason you keep doing it is because you're a completionist and you want to have the best armor possible for your character. It's like, duh, because who wouldn't want to have the best armor you can get in the game? Not to mention that you have to find all 4 giant fairies in order to get all 4 levels of upgrades. And guess what? The amount of money they require to even become available continually gets larger and larger. Who would have guessed? The first one you find requires 100 rupees to come to life. The second, 500 rupees. The third, 1,000. And the fourth, a whopping 10,000. All of this could have been as simple as searching for and discovering these locations across the world, and the great fairies emerging when you find them, rewarding exploration. You know, like in Zelda. But Nintendo knew it would add an extra 5 hours of gameplay by making you scrounge up the dough to pay their blooming fees. If only it stopped there. It's integrated into side quests too. Just one example here. To complete the From the Ground Up side quest, after you do a bit of running around, you have to give a guy 10 pieces of wood, then warp and find a Goron with Sun in their name. Then you warp back, you give the guy 20 pieces of wood. Then you warp and find a Gerudo with Sun in their name. Then you warp back and give the guy 30 pieces of wood. Then you warp and find a Rito with Sun in their name. Then you warp back and give the guy 50 pieces of wood. Then you warp and find a Zora with Sun in their name. You warp to your house, you tell people there to go to Terrytown, then you warp back to Terrytown, and you're done. How the hell is this clear and obviously lazy, uninspired, padding-ridden, uncreative trash fest deserving of Game of the Freaking Year? Yeah, so another way Nintendo fills your time with lazy, uninspired padding is through expanding your inventory slots. When you start the game, you only have a few open slots for your weapons, which means you can only carry a few weapons at a time. This is already a terrible idea, but naturally, they make it worse. To essentially buy additional inventory slots, there are 900 Korok seeds spread throughout the entire map that you trade into a King Korok guy in exchange for another slot. Now, Korok seeds are acquired in a few different ways. Each of these is a stupidly simple one-note task that honestly offer a small degree of enjoyment the very first time you complete them. Now, did I mention that there are 900 of these in Breath of the Wild? Nintendo took these 15 puzzles, if you can even call them that, and copy and pasted them to reach 900 replicated experiences. What small amount of charm they might have had vanishes pretty darn fast. After all my countless hours of playing, I found around 460. Even as a completionist, I have absolutely no desire to hunt all of these things down, especially considering what you're rewarded with if you do. That's right, they give you a piece of crap. So you get nothing. Nothing for spending who knows how long searching for all of these. Did no one at Nintendo ask, hey, is there a chance people won't like that? Like, they'll feel like they've just wasted all that time for nothing. Nah, they'll love it. Oh, and trading in the Korok seeds for inventory slots also falls victim to the same increasing quantity padding issue. The amount you need to buy a new slot scales differently for weapons, shields, and bows, but let's take a look at expanding your weapon inventory. To get your first inventory slot, you need just 1 Korok seed. For your next one, you need 2, then 3, then 5, then 8, then 12, then 17, 25, 35, 45, then for your very last one, you need 55 Korok seeds. That's 55 times you have to go around and repeat these same dumb puzzles just for your final slot. And that's just 11 progressively steeper levels just for the weapons category. That's not counting bows and shields. Bows have 8 slots you need to buy, and shields have 16 slots you need to buy. So just imagine how many times you're going to be running around finding these things. First of all, expanding inventory slots is yet another limitation that should never have been imposed. Also, why does Link have automatically expanding inventory slots for materials, food, and armor, but not for weapons and shields? You mean to tell me I can carry 79 different materials, and new slots open on their own when I find new food and materials, but not for weapons and shields, until I find more Korok seeds? This is blatantly manipulative game design. Second, Korok seeds are not a terrible idea. What Breath of the Wild uses them for is a terrible idea. Hunting down Korok seeds encourages players to explore every inch of the world. It lets you discover locations you would have otherwise never encountered on your quests. But if you're gonna have them in the game, good gracious, 900 is just ridiculous. 100 is just fine, even spread throughout this huge world. Like I said, the different types of puzzles you completed to find them were okay the first time around. But they should always have been puzzles you do just one time, not copy and pasted. Give your developers and game designers a reasonable number of small, one-note puzzles to place throughout the land. Again, like 100. Or hey, if you guys can't come up with 100 different mini puzzles, knock it back to 50. So long as the player is always doing something new. That way, repetition doesn't start to annoy them, and you still get the element of exploration and discovery. It actually also makes encountering these things more special, when there are so fewer of them. Lastly, and I realize this goes against everything you stand for, Nintendo, but reward the player when they find all of your pieces of crap. Hell, you can even keep the golden piece of poop as the trophy, but call it something like the Korok Blessing or something, that lets you make potions twice as strong. I stress that expanding inventory slots should disappear entirely in the next installment. Exploration and reward should not. Having your player trudge through days and days of working toward an objective and then giving them jack crap for it once they're done is just lazy and insulting. Like at some point in the game, you're going to come across this delightfully creepy guy named Kilton, who charges you with the task of defeating every single mini-boss across the land. Smell more padding yet? You hunt down 45 stone taluses, 45 Hinoxes, and 6 Moldugas, whatever. Repeating the same fight each time. I can't even tell you how long this might take you. And after all your monotonous repetition and weapon breaking, if you somehow manage the patience and endurance to see this time-filling task through to completion, one would think you'd be rewarded with something satisfying, right? Well, nope, you get medals. Just medals. Another lazy middle finger from Nintendo. Hey, maybe tie in the nature of the enemy to the reward. Like, stone taluses give you gemstones when you destroy them, right? So maybe the metal gives you a buff like loot twice as many gemstones from gem deposits or something. The Hinox metal could give you a buff where attacks do twice as much damage to larger enemies. And the Molduga? God, anything to make the desert a better experience. Heck, he swims through sand, doesn't he? How about the sand swim ability? That would have been pretty awesome. Imagine how cool it would have been to move through the desert sorta like Zora Link in Majora's Mask. You see, there's just so much potential for creativity here that was wasted. We just get a pat on the back for just about everything we do in this game. Because Nintendo was either lazy, out of time, out of ideas, intentionally cruel, intentionally stingy, or they just didn't understand the concept of action and reward in their own game. Now the last chunk of padding I'll talk about comes in the form of Breath of the Wild's downloadable content, 2 DLC packs. The first DLC pack contains an objective called the Trial of the Sword. When you first get the Master Sword in the main game, it's hardly the most powerful weapon in your arsenal. The trade-off is that instead of shattering into a million pieces like every other weapon in the game, it has to recharge, which takes 10 minutes of unpaused gameplay, as if the Master Sword's power is some kind of battery that you use up. Now the Trial of the Sword is a series of challenges that rewards you upon completion, with your Master Sword being twice as powerful. But you're still going to have to deal with the recharging inconvenience. In my opinion, this functionality should have been granted when you first get the sword. Not to mention that if you're going to give your player this special, albeit underpowered weapon, make improving it part of the core game, not DLC they have to pay extra money for. The challenges consist of 3 different tiers of multi-level enemy fights. Enemies you've already beaten many times before, but Nintendo makes these fights harder by taking everything you've earned in the game down to nothing. That's right, this overused gimmick again. They strip you of your armor, weapons, abilities, and food. You start from square one, just like you did at the beginning of the game. There are many more ways of making something challenging than by reusing the same tricks over and over. Nintendo has clearly run out of ideas. There is no creativity in this. There's no puzzle solving, no cleverness required, just being more careful and less aggressive with your attacks. The makers of this game are shallow and trivial when it comes to adding difficulty to their challenges. Their go-to library of gimmicks is comprised of nothing more than 1. Increasing the quantity of the thing required. It's more challenging to get 30 Dragon Claws instead of 3. 2. Limiting Link's movement or inventory. It's more challenging when we take away his armor and weapons. And 3. Adding more health or hit power to enemies. It's more challenging if the enemy takes more hits to defeat, or if they deal more damage. And that's it. That's all they've got in this game. Anyway, that's the Trial of the Sword. More rinse and repeat fights you have to be less aggressive with than normal. The setting is the same as the shrines, except there is typically forestry incorporated. No new assets, no new enemies, no new puzzles, nothing you haven't already done, and nothing even resembling a fun experience. Never are you going to have that dungeon was so fun and so cool, I really feel smart for figuring it out, feeling you used to get with Zelda games. Now the second DLC pack, the Champion's Ballad, claims to add more story and an additional Divine Beast to complete. So anyway, you go around defeating all the enemies in the area to reveal 3 more shrines. After you've completed those 3 shrines, there's a boss fight. Cool, right? Nope, it's a boss you've already fought before. But this time, wait for it, we've removed all your inventory. You have to beat it using only these crappy weapons and armor we've provided. So after you do that, you do it 3 more times, in the 3 other areas of the world. You complete tasks you've already done before to reveal more shrines containing puzzles it feels like you've already done before. So some of the challenges to reveal those shrines are fighting enemies you've already beaten, but Nintendo made them more difficult because they have more health. You kill them in the exact same way, you just do whatever you do 4 times instead of 1. All of Breath of the Wild's DLC feels like part of the core game experience that they deliberately cut out and set aside, so they could charge you an extra $20 later on. So anyway, then you do the new Divine Beast and the reward is actually pretty sweet. It's a motorcycle. Does it feel natural in a Zelda game? No way. Is it helpful when it comes to traversing the landscape? Heck yeah. The Master Cycle Zero, as it's called, actually gives you a new sensation when moving through Hyrule. It controls so much better than any horse you'll find in the game, and it's a joy to ride. But of course, because Nintendo has to ruin every positive experience you have in some way, You constantly have to stop and refill its gas tank, which operates more like a Mr. Fusion in Back to the Future. Stopping for a while to shove apples or whatever into it. Because it would have been outright ludicrous to just let people ride this thing, which uses this ancient technology that also powers the divine beasts and guardians and whatever else. Gee, you don't see them needing to be fed fruit every 2 minutes in order to function. So the motorcycle's nice, but I wish it would have been given to us much earlier in the game. Before you'd already finished doing everything. So that's the DLC. More repetitive padding with enforced limitations, thus amounting to what Nintendo perceives as challenge. This game has been heralded as being enormous, with tons of content. It's important to realize that this game is only enormous because it's 95% replication. When you boil it down, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is a very tiny game, with a series of half-baked ideas copy and pasted to egregious effect. This may have been Breath of the Wild's greatest sin. Number 9. The Massive World. The map in Breath of the Wild is gargantuan. It's bigger than Skyrim's, bigger than Horizon's and The Witcher's. The creators said that they used a map of Kyoto, Japan as an overlay of sorts to plot out how long it should take Link to travel across it. Clearly, a big focus when designing the world in Breath of the Wild was size. But bigger doesn't necessarily mean better. After completing the game, I can honestly say that the world is needlessly large. I understand that there's a lot of enjoyment to be found in running through vast, wide-open spaces, but there is not enough content in Breath of the Wild to legitimize and validate its size. There is so much nothing in this world. It's so incredibly empty. I'd rather have a map half the size so it was twice as dense. Your key areas can still retain their proportions, like your cities, towns, and the like, but all of the connective tissue could have been drastically compressed for a denser, leaner experience that would not have detracted from how unique some of these landscapes appear, if that's what you're worried about. Sometimes it feels like half of your total playtime was spent just running through empty terrain. I bring this up to emphasize the point that it doesn't matter how big your world is if there's so few interesting things to do in it. It doesn't matter if it takes you 400 hours to finish a game if 375 of those are just fluff. I'd rather have 30 incredible hours of dense, story-driven content than 300 hours of roaming and fetching, because this giant sea of nothingness is just a needlessly expansive sandbox with hardly any toys in it. Number 10. Benefit and consequence. People herald Breath of the Wild as having the most freedom ever in a Zelda game, but this is also the most restrictive Zelda game ever made. Breath of the Wild is a game based on systems of consequence and limitations. It seems that any benefit you're rewarded with always has some form of consequence, inconvenience, or trade-off. In other words, your abilities and rewards always come with setbacks or punishments. For example, you can run, but not continuously. You can climb, but not in rain, or without stamina. You can swim, but not well. You can wear whatever you want, but it might not have any buffs, and will probably come with terrible armor ratings. You can change the time of day, but only to morning, afternoon, or night, and only if you go to a bed, or a fire, or you make a fire. Nintendo in the next game, just give us a wait option. You can cook food and elixirs with buffs to help you, but only one buff per item. You can upgrade your armor, but you'll have to grind for what seems like an eternity. You can earn the Master Sword, but you can only use it till it's out of power. Also, it's not the most powerful weapon in the game. You can ride a horse, but not in the desert. Also, horse controls are stupidly clunky in this game. You can get the snow boots to run faster in snow, but they don't keep you warm despite being called snow boots. You can collect arrows on the ground that enemies have fired at you, but only a few. They could fire 90 more at you, but you've already hit Nintendo's quota of 4. You can also collect your own misfired arrows, but not if you fired them from bows that let you shoot more than one arrow at once, like the 5X Lionel bow. 5 arrows fired, not a single one to recover, not even one. You can get earrings and necklaces and circlets to increase your abilities, but these will replace your headgear, removing all set bonuses. Because apparently it's impossible for Link to wear earrings, a necklace, and a hat at the same time. You can have bullet time to carefully aim your shots, but only for as long as your stamina meter lasts. Also, only while you're in the air, never when you're on the ground, which just doesn't make any sense. You can wear the Thunder Helm so you won't lose health if you're struck by lightning, but it replaces your headgear, And if you're on your horse, you'll still get blasted off and your horse will fry like an egg. You can find swords and shields with extremely high ratings, like the Royal Guard stuff. But they're also incredibly fragile and will only last you a few good hits, so there's really no point in picking them up. You can have infinite bombs, but they're severely underpowered against enemies, and you have to wait for them to recharge between uses. You can carry as many ingredients and enemy or animal drops as you can, but not weapons. You can forge ancient arrows after hours and hours of accumulating the necessary requirements. These kill enemies in one shot. But some enemies, like the tough ones you'd actually use these on, like Lionel's, won't drop loot when you hit them with the freaking arrow. The one-hit obliterator thing lets you kill enemies in one hit, but just for this one tiny little section of the game. Also, they can one-hit you back if you're holding it. If you beat everything in the game, you're rewarded with the motorcycle, the Master Cycle Zero. But it runs out of gas and you constantly have to refill it. You can get dragon parts, but only one per day. Just let us farm the damn thing. Let us hit it with 7 arrows and get 7 parts. Hell, that could actually require more skill in some instances. The outcome's the same, it just takes 3 hours one way, 3 minutes the other. You can replenish all of your health by sleeping in a bed, but not resting by a fire? You can buy and sell things in this game, at stores and with merchants. Materials and armor even. But not weapons, because of course, no stores in a fantasy world would ever carry weapons. They carry their ammo though. You can get elemental weapons, fire, ice, and shock swords. But their power runs out quickly and has to recharge. And so on, and so on, and so on. Nintendo never gives you anything without taking something back. It makes things less special. It makes things less fun.
But that's the point of the game. All these little things you have to consider working against you. It makes you strategize. It's a struggle, yeah, but that's part of the experience.
I have a hard time finding an experience rewarding, enjoyable, and satisfying if your rewards are always tainted. And people don't play Zelda to be inconvenienced in every way possible by every aspect of the game. They play it for the fun of fantasy adventure, exploration, combat, unique characters and locations, intriguing enemies, magical items and abilities, challenging puzzles that stump you and make you think creatively, and for the escapism of transportive storytelling. Number 11. The story. I've already lighted upon the fact that there's not much actual story within this game. Ganon overpowered Link, Zelda, and the 4 champions 100 years before. Now Link's back, he enlists the divine beasts in each realm, then faces off again with Ganon.
Cool story, Hansel.
That's about it. The opportunity to present a compelling, riveting new chapter in the Zelda franchise is utterly wasted. The world of Zelda is rife with material begging to be mined by competent storytellers. This is an adventure series, and deserves an adventurous plot that connects with its audience. Games today are more of an art form than they've ever been. Whether you like them or not, the stories you're playing out in games like Fallout, The Last of Us, the new Tomb Raider series, Horizon Zero Dawn, Skyrim, BioShock, Mass Effect, and Uncharted are extensive, gripping, enthralling, and immersive works of talented writers. Zelda is one of the largest franchises in history, and there's no reason it should be lacking this crucial element. Stories create attachment to what you're playing. Attachment to your character, the people you meet, the locations you visit, the plight you're tasked with overcoming. It's what makes what you're doing important and meaningful. A giant world without a story just makes that world feel emptier. A few cutscenes where Zelda gets emotional and the champions showcase their one-note cartoony personalities is embarrassing. Oh, I'm the arrogant one. I'm the tough one. I'm the one that has a crush on Link. And I'm the warrior one? Also, story is what's happening now, what you're playing through. Most of these cutscenes are what we call exposition, folks. And they're all pretty pointless exposition at that. Like, even in the DLC where Nintendo claimed they were going to expand on the story, we get stuff like another stupid exposition scene showing that the big tough Goron is actually afraid of dogs. I hate to break it to you, this does not count as story. I'd say, come on Nintendo, you can do so much better. But at this point, I'm really not that sure. Number 12, the art style. So let's talk about the look and feel of Breath of the Wild. I'll start off by saying I'm really tired of hearing reviewers say things like, "This game is gorgeous." I mean, it's okay. If you've never played another game before, it has day, night, and weather cycles that can create interesting lighting across the landscape. The actual design aesthetic of Wind Waker's cell shading meets Skyward Sword's whimsical style and happy muted pastels is okay, but gorgeous? That term's starting to become really overused. The first thing I noticed when Link ran out into the world at the beginning of the game wasn't, "Oh man, look at that gorgeous vista." It was, looks like a game that would have come out 8 years ago. Why are all the lines jagged? Why does this look so bad? I thought this system just came out. Then I realized that this game and the Nintendo Switch system were still unapologetically behind the times graphically. It didn't help that the last RPG I played was Horizon Zero Dawn, one of the most visually rich games ever made. Now that game you can call gorgeous and I'll agree with you every single time. I eventually got used to Zelda's graphical shortcomings, and don't get me wrong, there have been plenty of times while playing this game that I've thought,
"Oh, that's a pretty sunset."
I think it looks as good as the system it's on allows it to. The Nintendo Switch just isn't a powerful machine, and the art style is an obvious graphical compensation for the lack of processing power. Consequently, Breath of the Wild is plagued by a low resolution, reduced frame rate, inexcusably poor anti-aliasing, pop-in, and short draw distances that just shouldn't be around even when it came out in 2017. Not to mention that the game will flat out freeze on you for a few seconds at a time. Thankfully, the game never crashed on me once, and that is a huge thumbs up. Now, the gaming community is fairly divided when it comes to how much game specs like frame rate and resolution actually matter. I'll get this out of the way and say that while, yes, I prefer games to run at current standards when it comes to resolution and frame rates, I also believe that graphics don't necessarily influence whether or not a game is fun. It's like watching a movie on VHS after being used to Blu-ray for years and years. It doesn't change whether or not you like the movie, but sometimes you're overly aware of the substandard presentation, to the point where it can actually be distracting at times. And for some reason, and good lord did this distract me the entire time I played the game, I hated it so much. There's this horrible, yellow, dingy, dusty, nuclear radiation haze filter over so much of the game. It makes Breath of the Wild look washed out. It looks like toxic pollution. I wish this had been toned down significantly or just removed altogether. Now this is just me removing the filter with some color correction, but you can really see how thickly they laid it on. I think it's in there for a couple reasons. First, it's an intentional filter to give the presentation a distinct quality, like an Instagram filter. Sort of like digital grading to make this game feel like it has its own unique look. Second, and this is the biggest reason, it's in there to mask some of the game's graphical shortcomings. Now I know that atmospheric elements naturally make things that are farther away look hazy, especially when you start factoring in things like fog and rain, mist, time of day, and mileage. But when you essentially remove the filter, you can see a deeper contrast in values and richer colors. It feels like this is how the game originally looked before it was messed with. The problem Nintendo faced with this is that the more precision and clarity you present, the more your graphical shortcomings will become blatantly obvious. So, to blur some of those jagged lines, like the old school technique of breathing on a camera lens, you take a filter that looks something like this and put it over everything to blend the presentation together a little more. Like for a scene like this, they thought, yeah, that looks great, but wait, the trees in the distance aren't looking too awesome. The textures are fairly blurry, and we're starting to get some artifacting in the dark spots, starting to look like this game came out on the PS1. Let's just throw this horrid, rancid smokescreen over everything to hide the cracks. There, that's better. Only, it's not. I would have much rather enjoyed the game like this, than being forced to look through a smokescreen of cloudy piss the whole time. And they use it everywhere, like all the time. There is so much of it. And don't get me wrong here, it's not the fact that they used a filter that I found so jarring, it's how they used it. I just wish it didn't look so radioactive. So all that being said, all this analysis of Zelda's graphics, you may agree, you may not, that's fine, but here's why it matters. People have been patiently waiting for an HD Zelda for decades. And I'm not talking about the HD remasters we've gotten in Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, although I'm glad Nintendo made those and I hope they continue to do so with their other titles. Anyway, people have been waiting for an original Zelda game in HD, not simply remasters of previous games. A new adventure, a new experience, to enjoy on their new, giant, super crisp TVs. With Breath of the Wild, we almost got that. This still isn't Zelda in true HD, it struggles to barely maintain running at 900p at 30 frames per second, if you're lucky. That's just embarrassing. And that really sucks when you shell out $300 for a new game console. $60 for the game, and this thing you're excited about playing looks like it came out on something 2 console generations ago. Now, Nintendo said that they have plans about releasing a second generation of the Switch. Not anytime soon, but it's on their docket. Something more powerful. But whatever that's going to be should have been this system. The fact that Breath of the Wild can't run at decent specs from 5 years ago, and has to add a layer of nuclear Vaseline over everything to hide its shortcomings, is shameful, regardless of whether or not the game is fun. The fact is, Blu-ray just looks and feels better than VHS. Number 13. Swimming. What the hell happened to swimming with this game? Let's get past the fact that swimming requires stamina, because that's just freaking mental and should have never been a thing. Link's movement is so slow, stilted, and awkward in water. I get that there's no functionality for him to dive down or swim underwater because there's nothing to do underwater, but how is swimming this bad? Even when you fully upgrade your Zora armor so you can swim the fastest you possibly can, this is what you have to work with. I mean, why not just let us swim at a reasonable speed? Look at all these previous Zelda games. See how fluid and satisfying it is to move through water. How did anyone in their right mind think this worked? Pumping weirdly and ineffectually forward in slow, plunking kicks. It is by far the worst swimming ever seen in any video game ever made. And here's a question. Why is it that the Zora breastplate allows Link to swim incredibly fast and smoothly, vertically, up gigantic waterfalls, but not horizontally across, everything else? Number 14. Horses. Speaking of things that suck, horses are pretty and they let you travel around the world faster. Yay! But in Breath of the Wild, their controls are ridiculously clunky, awkward, and unresponsive even when you find the good ones. Controlling Epona in Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess feels amazing in comparison. Light years ahead of whatever drunk idiot was responsible for programming horse controls in Breath of the Wild. They're horrible. I can't tell you how many times I had to restart all those horse jumping quests just because of the poorly implemented controls. Number 15. Display cases. I really like this addition. Being able to showcase things you picked up, displaying them like trophies. I wanted to display more though, maybe an armor set. It had nothing to do with saving a sword or shield so it didn't take up room in my inventory. It was purely for personalizing Link's house. It was usually stuff I didn't want to throw away, but I knew I'd never use it again. Like the 2 Zora tridents. Although, with the whole weapon breaking thing, it would have been nice if Link had like a chest or something where you could store some backup weapons. I know that would have been affording us players too huge of a courtesy though. But come on, if you're gonna have everything break after a few hits, Link could totally have a weapon stash. Number 16. Item drops. This was something I sorely missed from previous games. I get that Nintendo wanted to do away with hearts appearing when you cut down enemies or shrubs, because they wanted you to cook meals in order to heal yourself. But I feel like they could have given us things like arrows a lot more frequently. Anyway, I really don't see the harm in giving the player a few extra sources of things they need. There's no reason arrows, rupees, hell even food, couldn't be hiding under grasses and shrubs. It would also add incentive for whacking away at those things, beyond maybe finding a cricket or a lizard. Number 17. The Flurry Rush. Now the Flurry Rush is a slow motion, get a lot of hits in on your enemy mechanic that you trigger if you dodge an enemy strike at the right time. The only thing is, it's so imperfect and inconsistent that it doesn't work all of the time. I can't tell you how many times I thought, I did jump back when he swung at me. Why'd it work last time, but not this time? I did the exact same thing. Sometimes you can even trigger it before they start swinging. This is what you call half-baked. It wasn't consistent. It wasn't perfected in development. It was either a blessing or a frustration, depending on your luck. Number 18. No special combat moves. Along the same lines, one of the things I loved about previous installments were the combat maneuvers you learned along the way. Dodging, the backslice, the helm splitter. There are so many, and they really gave you a lot of options when it came to deciding how you were going to engage in combat. In Breath of the Wild, there are none. Nothing. There's just the Flurry Rush. Number 19. Locking on. Ocarina of Time introduced locking onto an enemy with Z targeting. It worked. Twilight Princess managed to improve on it, but something must have happened when they were making Breath of the Wild, because it's so erratic, imperfect, and confusing. If you're in the middle of a group of enemies, it's even worse. It really is a roll of the dice who you'll actually lock onto, and the camera never adjusts properly, so you might be swinging at someone you're not even looking at, someone you can't even see, and they're farther away from you than another enemy who's whacking you in the back. Whatever they did for this game makes it difficult to see what's actually happening. Locking on has now become a sporadic, confusing, randomly finicky roulette guess-a-thon of an experience. How did something that worked so well in older titles manage to get worse in this game? Number 20. Spawning enemies. Sometimes it feels like you can't go 10 steps without a Yiga clan warrior spawning around you. Or when you're walking around at night, skeletal versions of enemies pop up constantly. This is so freaking annoying, and it's obvious why Nintendo's doing it. They just don't want you running around for too long without having to fight somebody. But it's never a feeling of, oh yay, a fight. It's agitating. Like, ugh, are you kidding me? I just did this like 30 seconds ago. Seriously, I can't even touch the ground or turn a corner without being incessantly pestered by these guys. It happens far too frequently. Yes, you can outrun them, sometimes, but if you're committed to doing something where you're standing, you gotta take the time to take them out. And then, again, take out new ones a minute later. After the Yiga clan side quest, their constant spawns should have either been reduced or stopped altogether, and the skeletal guys could pop up 1/10 of the times they currently do, and still that would be too much. Number 21. Link's run animation. Okay, this is a small one, and maybe it's just me, I get that, but I never liked the animation for Link's running. It's too frantic, like he's flailing around 3 times faster than he's actually running. And he has weird giant sweat drops pumping out of his head. I remember seeing it for the first time and thinking, well, that's exaggerated and really bouncy. Number 22. Useless NPCs. The non-playable characters in this game are pretty freaking pointless. Yeah, there are some that give you side quests, but tons of these people just spout off trivial dialogue that has absolutely no impact on you. They're just there to fill space, like, oh cool, I found this interesting looking person wandering through the wilderness. Maybe they're important. Oh no. No, they're not. Like the last 30 people I ran into. Number 23. Control schemes and button mapping. This is something that affected me just as much at the end of my playthrough as it did at the beginning. And it's not just limited to this game. It's a complaint I have about the Switch itself. For ages and ages, the select or action button on controllers has consistently been here. The cancel or go back a screen button has consistently been here. Or here depending on the system. For the Switch and Breath of the Wild, Nintendo thought it would be fun to switch these around. So what results is what players have known and developed a muscle memory for across multiple platforms is suddenly swapped, for no reason at all except to be different. Which means I can't tell you how many times I canceled out of things I wanted to select, and selected things when I wanted to cancel, or go back a screen. Nintendo, please give your players the ability to select different control schemes so they don't have to fumble around your needless imposition of backward button actions. As for button mapping, it would have been very helpful for the player to be able to assign healing materials to a button, so that during a fight, if you're about to die, you don't have to keep pausing the game over and over and over again to open a menu, eat the thing, unpause, fight some more, pause, etc. You get it. You already opened the menu too much in this game. Number 24. Desert travel. You can't use your horse in the desert because Nintendo wants you to capture sand seals to travel fast through the sand. Look, I don't want to have to pause the game, switch to my stealth armor, grab it, switch back to my desert armor so that I don't burn to death, ride the seal into the desert, assuming I even have a destination, do something in the desert, lose the seal, then be stuck trudging my way back through the sand. Horses can move in the desert. This is a widely known fact. Just let us ride our horse in the desert. I'd say my favorite area in the game is the Faron region. It's unique, and there's a lot of variety to it. My least favorite area is by far the desert. It really could have benefited from being a third of its size at least. It's a literal sandbox of plodding, monotonous, boring nothingness. I know that deserts are barren expanses in real life, people, but this is a game. A big, empty nothing full of inconveniences does not translate to an enjoyable experience. I avoid going into the desert at all costs. Number 25. Enemy Variety. Typically, Zelda games are chock full of interesting enemies, and not only are there a wide variety of unique character designs, but they also come with interesting ways in which to combat them. Breath of the Wild is sorely lacking in this area. For comparison's sake, let's take a look at Ocarina of Time. Here's a complete list of every enemy in Ocarina, and if there are elemental duplicates, like you have regular Keese, then Fire Keese and Ice Keese, I'm going to leave out those replicants because it's essentially the same enemy. So here you go. Here's everything. Now let's take a look at Breath of the Wild's complete library of enemies. It's drastically shallow in comparison, and you really feel it when playing this game. Nintendo once again relies on repetition to pad out the experience. Not only are there typically skeletal and elemental versions of each enemy, but for a good number of these guys, there are different colored versions as well, indicating their difficulty. What sucks about this laziness is that the only thing different about the colors is how strong they are. You defeat them all the exact same way. Contrast this with Ocarina, nearly every single one of these enemies presents you with a unique challenge. They all require different strategies you have to learn in order to beat them. A few of them will even stump you for a minute until you start thinking cleverly, using your inventory and environment to take advantage of each specific enemy's weaknesses. In Breath of the Wild, nothing is strategic unless you want to add an optional, unessential element of strategy to your combat. Like, you can totally just go up and whack all the enemies in the game with your sword. But you can also do stuff like shooting a shock choo-choo so that it also shocks the bokoblins around it. But like I said, that's not required. That's you choosing to make the fight more interesting for yourself. The point is, gone are the days when fights in Zelda offered you opportunities for different combat styles based on their enemy designs. That feeling of, oh, how do I beat this guy? I haven't figured it out yet, is all but non-existent in Breath of the Wild. And it makes for repetitive combat that never asks you to adapt, to learn about your new unique enemy, and exploit their exclusive combat characteristics in order to defeat them and progress through the game. Breath of the Wild is so lackluster in variety. I hope they put a greater emphasis on this for the next installment. Number 26. Save slots. So Nintendo did away with different save slots in Breath of the Wild. The only way you can start a new game is by overriding your current one, or by signing into the game under a different player profile. This is just a horrible idea, especially when you, playing under your own profile, may want to start another game for yourself, but also keep the progress you made in your first one. So this method sucks, and Nintendo should definitely bring back good old save slots for the next game. Number 27. Link the Ragdoll. Being knocked on your ass is not something new to video games. It's expected, and oftentimes comical. But for some reason, Nintendo decided that when Link gets smacked just a little too hard, he rolls and rolls, and rolls, and rolls. Link just turns into a pathetic sack of jello, tumbling on until Nintendo says, okay, he can stand back up now. Either shorten the amount of time Link rolls, or allow players to help him recover. This is just really stupid. Number 28. Cooking. Now, I'm neither here nor there on cooking. I don't hate it. I don't love it. I didn't like that I had to stop whatever I was doing just to find a campsite and cook food for 5 or 10 minutes incessantly throughout the game. And the biggest problem with cooking is that it's so important for like the first 5 hours, but after that, not so much. Early on, you'll need to cook hot stuff to stay warm in cold weather, and cold stuff to stay cool in warm weather, but the need for food and elixirs to survive harsh temperatures dissolves completely the instant you get clothing for that area. Like, once you get the snow quill armor, you're good. You can survive in the cold, no need to cook. So after that, the only thing I really needed cooking for was health recovery. And yeah, you can make stuff that gives you higher defense and stealth and speed and attack, but I never did that, because the effects are laughably temporary, they're just not worth it. And when you use them, there are these annoying timers that show up on your screen every time, they're distracting. Anyway, all those buffs weren't worth the trouble, and besides, I didn't want to waste materials on them, because I thought I would probably need that stuff for upgrades later. Now, the game badgers you to experiment with new and exciting recipes constantly throughout your playthrough, but there's no real incentive for this, so why bother? You can find recipes for rare dishes spread throughout the world, but if you're like me, you'll probably forget what it takes to make the more complicated dishes. This is where a recipe book would have come in handy. When you experiment and discover a new recipe, the game saves it in your recipe book, and recipes are added when you find them around the world. Hey, it's another thing for completionists to hunt down too. Have you found all the hidden recipe pages spread throughout the world? Have you cooked everything and achieved the rank of Master Chef? I smell a side quest! I've mentioned it before, but allowing only one buff per meal is just stupid. Swift carrots make you run fast. Stamella shrooms give you stamina. You should be able to mix them together and get a meal that gives you both advantages. I would have cooked way more if I could combine interesting and rare items to make superfoods or elixirs with multiple effects. Ultimately, I found cooking an interesting, albeit needlessly restrictive addition to the game, that I eventually did not enjoy going back to repeatedly. Instead of cooking more meals to recover my health, I usually just fast traveled back to my house and slept, which again, you shouldn't need to do. Because logically speaking, Link should be able to slowly recover his health. This has been in games since forever. People naturally heal over time. Hell, some games give you your full life meter back just for moving to a safe zone for a few seconds. Now, I'm not saying Nintendo should go that far, but recovering a quarter of a heart every 30 seconds or so wouldn't be too crazy in this day in gaming. I mean, realistically speaking, people's bodies heal with time, not just by eating apples and chicken. Number 29. Repetitive dialogue. Now, Zelda games have a pretty strong history of being utterly ignorant of what they've already told you. And it's everywhere. I remember wanting to pull my hair out during one of the horse courses. Like, just the repetitive back and forth with this guy if you messed up one time was absolutely ridiculous. It took forever to get through, and I messed up a lot. Now compare this to failing at the horseback archery minigame in Ocarina of Time. Wow, so fast, so nice. Like, seriously, Nintendo, fix this for good in your next game. Number 30. The Unchanging World. So when you reach Gerudo City, Link's not allowed in because he's a guy. So he has to disguise himself as a woman. He befriends many people inside the city, including the highest authorities, and literally saves the day, solving their biggest problem, their whole Divine Beast portion of the game. He even recovers their stolen sacred artifact, the Thunder Helm, and helps out with a few side quests around the city. But even after all that, he's still not allowed in, unless you pause your game and switch to your women's clothing. It's like nothing you did even mattered, or ever happened. You know, I hate to keep bringing up Ocarina, but they just did some of these things so much better. After the whole "you're not allowed into our Gerudo Fortress" portion of the game, Link earns their respect and gets a hall pass like, "Thanks, you're cool to come and go as you please now." Yay, I completed a challenge and was rewarded for it. I really miss the way this feels. When the dauntingly massive feats you accomplish have zero impact on the world, their significance feels lessened. When you can witness the effects your actions have made on the world, it feels like you're making actual quantifiable progression through the game. In Breath of the Wild, the world you enter on day 1 is exactly the same at the very end of your playthrough, with only a few minuscule exceptions. For one side quest, you build a small town called Terrytown on a tiny speck of land. There's constant rain on the path to Zora's domain that stops when you complete the Divine Beast. And then, the Divine Beasts move a little ways so they can aim their laser beams at Hyrule Castle. The point is, it's more rewarding for the player when we can see that Link has actually made a difference in the world. It's also always bothered me how Breath of the Wild, and even some of the previous Zelda games that I really enjoyed, always backtrack you after defeating the final boss. After you defeat Ganon, your game is rewound back to the moment right before you engaged him. Because of this, you never get that sense of closure or completion for the main storyline. I mean, maybe they do it so you can go back and fight Ganon again if you want to, if you just really enjoyed that fight. But hey, if that's the case, just let Link return to the already completed area and say, "Repeat boss fight?" You can do that for all your dungeon bosses too in the next game. I mean, it's not like the rest of the world would have changed at all if the game just let us continue on after defeating Ganon. So here's hoping this gets addressed in the next installment. Number 31. Two-handed weapons. I rarely used two-handed weapons throughout the course of my playthrough. I understand that they're larger, heavier weapons, but they swung too slowly for much of the combat for me. I ended up only using them on the things that really required them. like the Stone Talus. I wish these had been less cumbersome. I'd have used them a lot more, like the two-handed weapons in Wind Waker, or the two-handed Begoron sword in Ocarina. Best weapon in the game. It's fun to use, highly effective, and the only trade-off is that you can't hold a shield when it's equipped. But if Ocarina of Time was made by the Breath of the Wild team, the Begoron sword would have taken 3 times as long to swing, and it would have shattered every 2 minutes. Number 32. Amiibo. If you dig through Breath of the Wild's menus, you'll find that there are skills that get checked off as you complete them. One of these can only be checked off if you've activated an Amiibo, which means paying more money. For those that don't know, Amiibo are figurines of Nintendo characters that you tap on your system which unlock things in your game. In Breath of the Wild, they might drop chests from the sky, giving you supplies, armor, or weapons. You know, things that should have been included in the main game, or at the very least, its overpriced DLC. Amiibo are the most blatant money-making gimmick ever seen out of Nintendo. I despise the very concept of Amiibo, especially considering I can't enjoy everything Breath of the Wild has to offer unless I fork up the dough for each and every one of these things. How much cash would that be, you ask? Well, currently there are 22 Amiibo compatible with Breath of the Wild that range anywhere from $30 to $45 each. So by the time you purchase the $60 game and the $20 DLC, if you really want to experience everything in Breath of the Wild, it will cost you upwards of $1,000. This is extortion. This is insulting. I can understand a $5 or $10 armor, weapons, and horse DLC that, yes, again, should already be included with the game or your season pass, but I have zero intention of buying a Nintendo just to get these rewards. And even if you just want that one outfit that comes with that one Amiibo, it's still more than half the cost of the game for that thing. So Amiibo turned Breath of the Wild into a completionist's nightmare. I wish these things had never been made. Number 33, motion controls. So Nintendo wanted to put the motion control gimmick in Breath of the Wild. They did so in the form of gyroscope puzzles, giant things tethered to the movement of your controller. They're still frustrating, they're still imperfect, and you constantly have to recalibrate the connection. Technically, you can eventually complete these awkward tasks, but there is nothing fun about them. They're challenging, but the challenge comes from the technical difficulties you'll experience, because they're not responding as they should. Nintendo, please, just let motion controls die. In conclusion, the interpretation of challenge. Now at this point you might be thinking, this guy claims to have hated so many things about Breath of the Wild, but he played it for hundreds of hours over the course of a year. Breath of the Wild's shortcomings weren't deal breakers for me, they were just huge disappointments. Breath of the Wild always feels like choosing between the lesser of evils. Not choosing what will be most fun, but rather what will suck the least. I want to be challenged when playing a game like this. I don't want it to be easy. And yes, something challenging can be frustrating, but it's not a good sign when you have frustrating aspects of your game that comprise the bulk of your challenges. And that's the biggest problem with Breath of the Wild. Nintendo's interpretation of challenge. What it is, what constitutes it, what passes for it. Nintendo seems to think that challenge, limitation, and repetition are all interchangeable, mutually exclusive concepts. The core gameplay in Breath of the Wild is ultimately a series of frustrations, annoyances, inconveniences, and limitations that don't add to the experience, they detract from it. And what's sad is that they're all entirely unnecessary. Yes, they make the game challenging, but they challenge enjoyment, pacing, movement, controls, immersion, and most of all, your player's patience. They're not challenging puzzles, challenging bosses, and they don't challenge your skill. The point is, there's a big difference between a game being challenging and a game being challenging to enjoy. Now, Breath of the Wild is being celebrated and awarded for breaking Zelda conventions, because it took chances, whether or not those new gameplay mechanics were actually enjoyed by their rabid fanbase, like Nintendo's being rewarded for its blind leap of faith, but not held accountable as to where it actually landed. My biggest fear is that Nintendo will make another Breath of the Wild, because of the acclaim this game has received. If it won Game of the Year, well, we must have done something right. Right? I'm fairly confident that Nintendo already thinks that some of their poorly thought out decisions were validated by their awards, and I'd hate to see the same mistakes repeated in the next installment. If a new Zelda game was announced, we'd all be totally hyped for it. But if they said, yeah, And it's still gonna have weapon breaking, and the same upgrade system, and stamina. Everyone would be like, I'm less excited now. And you know what? Maybe you completely disagree. Over the last year, it's been interesting examining just how divisive of a game this has been. You take a franchise people have adored since childhood, and you shake things up to keep the franchise fresh. Some people appreciate the risks and changes and complete dismissal of everything that came before, and celebrate it for the leap of faith it took with its new direction. Others felt that that new direction was a betrayal of what made the franchise special in the first place, regardless of that franchise needing to evolve. In other words, they feel like something they love got tweaked and messed with so much that it no longer resembled that thing they loved. Even as a hardcore Zelda fan, I found this game a far cry from what I believe to be a Zelda game. Breath of the Wild feels more like an experiment than anything else. They designed one of the biggest sandboxes ever to test out their new physics system, but it was also an opportunity for Nintendo to try out 12 or so new mechanics and just kinda see how they were received. I honestly can't fathom how this game earned 10 out of 10 scores and Game of the Year awards. It is so remarkably flawed. Seriously, if this game was called The Legend of Toby, everyone would have said it's an undercooked subpar Zelda knockoff. Now, taking this entire review into consideration, Breath of the Wild is a game you can enjoy despite its flaws. They'll undoubtedly detract from your overall experience, but depending on your own personal threshold for tolerating them, that's not to say the overall experience isn't enjoyable, or that it will be entirely ruined by those things. It is extremely fair to say that even with all of its frustrations, this game is definitely worth your time to play through its first 10 hours or so. After that, when considering the game in its entirety, the negative effects on your experience start multiplying exponentially, compounding on each other until Breath of the Wild reveals its true nature, and your overall experience progressively worsens. I'd recommend stepping away from Breath of the Wild after completing the main story. The rest of the game just isn't as satisfying. And that's it, y'all. I'm done. If you liked or hated this review, leave a comment. And don't forget to like us on Facebook. Also, if you like fantasy stuff like Zelda and Lord of the Rings, check out my books. They're on Amazon, they're fantasy adventures. Or you can head over to the site for more information.